First of all, I'd just like to welcome all the family, friends, other guests we may have. It is family weekend, and this kind of kicks off our McCarthy Center schedule, at least for the fall semester. Tonight we have the Honorable Samuel Kaplan and his wife Sylvia. Samuel, as many of you have seen on the poster, was the U.S. ambassador to Morocco from 2009 to 2013, and his wife Sylvia, also a firecracker in and of herself, has been his partner in all things and a key component to his time while in Morocco. To their right, we have the Edward L. Henry Professor of Political Science, Matt Lindstrom. He is the director of the McCarthy Center, and he will be interviewing the Kaplans tonight. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Matt, and we can get started. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. By the way, that was the distinguished Richie Podman, student coordinator of the McCarthy Center. Right on. So yeah, as Richie said, thank you all for coming out tonight. Normally we don't have quite an elevated stage, so it's a little odd being this elevated, but it's nice that everyone can see us. So anyway, happy, if I can say, happy Friday, but it's also September 11th, and so I think I just wanted to recognize that 14 years after the tragic events of 2001. But I think it's also kind of a timely anniversary. We have some fantastic guests tonight to talk about some of these issues related to culture, related to religion, related to international affairs, and getting along, and diplomacy, and this type of thing. So look forward to that conversation. And we're going to turn to the audience throughout the hour that we're here, so be prepared for questions. I'll kick it over to the audience fairly quickly. I have a series of questions, but I'm not going to go through all of them before we go to you. And we will have at least one microphone circulating around. So how's everyone doing anyway? All right? Ready to go? And by the way, with the politics and the pint deal, we want to keep this casual, so it's not like being in class. Just get up and go, and there's more pizza coming in, so if you feel the urge, help yourself. So, well, Mr. Ambassador, Mrs. Kaplan, it's great to have you both here. You two are arguably the most famous couple in the state of Minnesota. You're well known for your civic engagement, your community devotion to community affairs, your support of so many charitable causes, and your service to the country, which we deeply appreciate. I thought we could kind of start off with a couple of questions that get at your kind of background, your biographical story. You both have played and continue to play such an active role in local, state, and national, and now international affairs. When you think back, why are you so committed to civic engagement? Was there some things or some experiences, your parents, what influences your values related to civic engagement and being involved and giving back and so forth?
If I may say thank you. Thank you for your hospitality this afternoon. Thank you for showing us through this magnificent campus. We have been in Minnesota all of our lives, and we know about Johnny's, and we know you're to be respected in the state of Minnesota for the leadership you provide. And St. Ben's and St. John's are two of the great institutions of this state, and we're honored to be invited. I thought about your question, and I thought about your question before. Every segment of society makes a contribution to it. The business community, the academic community, the cultural communities. But if you believe that you want to achieve economic justice and social equality, and if you believe in human rights, the vehicle for doing that is quite simply to advance the people you believe should be elected to political office. Because it is the way of reality. The reality is that it is those people who are elected who control the buttons on what turns us into a real society that respects others. You can talk about why you do it because you enjoy doing it, but the reality is you're electing people who are in a position where they can make the decisions that are ultimately determinative for the quality of our lives.
I also want to express my admiration for this campus, my appreciation for being here. This was a wonderful way to spend an afternoon. I am so pleased we were able to do this. I just would like to talk about how I got involved and developed sort of a sense of moral outrage, which kind of is what, it motivates me, it gets me going in the morning, you get up and you read the paper and you say, oh my God, are they doing that? Well, it started, I think, when I was quite little. I read John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath when I was like 6 years old, and my mother took it away, and she was very upset that I was reading that book, and so I sneaked and read it anyway. And then when I got to high school, I read Cry of the Beloved Country. And then when I was a young married, I always say trapped housewife, this was my other marriage before Sam and I were married many years ago.
We've been married 41 years.
Long time ago. But this was in the 60s with all of the civil rights turmoil going on and outrageous things happening. And I would go to parties or dinners and end up having big arguments with people. And then I read a book called Crisis in Black and White by Charles Silberman, and I learned about community organizing, and I realized that ordinary people can get involved and can just call their neighbors and can make things happen. I put a sign up in my window. I lived in the suburbs, and it said, white racism must go. And that was all the things I've done in my life. That might have been the bravest, because it's hard to separate yourself from the neighbors and do something that they think is weird. It's the same thing when you're in school. So and then I got involved in, as Sam said, in various organizations, but ultimately I came, as he did, to believe that working for political candidates is the most efficient way to save the world and to change things. And so we've both been doing that for a long time.
So we really came together over the Vietnam War and our opposition to the war, and that is a very political thing, as you know. And we became involved in political activities quite a lot, but not overwhelmingly so. And then in 1990, we met Paul Wellstone, and that changed our lives. And we became the chairs of his campaign, and he became our closest friend. And he became a great American senator, and that altered a great deal of how we saw the world.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So you met Paul Wellstone, and you certainly helped, as did others, but you really helped kind of launch his career, and you helped Keith Ellison get elected, and certainly Barack Obama. Let's pivot a little bit to your time. So then you're selected as U.S. Ambassador, Sam, and how does that happen? For those of you in the audience who perhaps want to be a U.S. Ambassador, anyone? Yeah, a few out there.
Lots of people here, actually.
And actually, yeah, there's a lot of. And
Raj wants to be an ambassador.
Raj does. Raj already is an ambassador, but yeah.
You know that the United States is the only country really who has a system of political ambassadors. About a third of the ambassadors are political. There are people who are involved in the community in various ways and are chosen by the president following his campaign. The rest are careerists, and they start out as junior level officers, State Department officers, and they eventually get to be ambassadors. Some of them don't. So when we got involved in Barack Obama's campaign in 2008, it never occurred to us that would be what would happen. People would, mention it sometimes. So when it finally happened, it was kind of a shock, but it was a good time in our lives. Many of the ambassadors were younger and at a different stage, and they had children in school, and they had businesses that were the kind of thing that were complicated. But for us, it was wow, I mean, it was just a great opportunity.
Sylvia's being modest. The White House called in November of 2008 and said, would one of you wish to be considered as an ambassador?
I would be a terrible ambassador because you really, you know, it's a lot of work and a lot of self-discipline, and I was very happy to be there and to ride shotgun and to, and you know, and I stayed home and cooked, well, and then after a while I started going and making speeches too, but it was just a great learning experience, and anybody who would have an opportunity to, you know, what you do is you get to hang out with the other ambassadors, and they all have wonderful stories because most of the other countries, they are all political ambassadors, so they've been doing it for a lot of years, and you just learn a lot. It was a great opportunity.
She told everyone I would have been a great ambassador, but if I couldn't be an ambassador, I would have made a great butler. I thought that was a strange comment.
Well, we did have our butler when we were in Morocco, and he was an amazing person, Kamel, our butler. And if you think about it, it's the skills actually are very much the same.
It is, Matthew, it is a completely unique experience. At dinner, I was talking to the people at our table about the fact that of all of the people in Minnesota I know, I only know one man in military uniform. When I was in Morocco, we had 25 senior officers, mostly colonels, who were diplomats, military diplomats. We had 450 people at the embassy working to promote America's interests in Morocco and to protect the interests of America.
Well, good. That's a good segue to my next question about just kind of walk us through what you do as an ambassador and as a couple representing the United States. I asked, you know, it just strikes me as such a heavy burden to represent a country like the U.S. Complicated. What's that like? What's kind of a day in the life?
Well, a day in the life, I would tell you, and what made us unique is in the 3.5 years that we were in Morocco, we were never apart at night. This was a very unusual kind of tour of duty, and we saw it as a team effort. I told this story before, and I tell it again. It's my favorite story, and that is that while I was driving with the head of our security detail, we had a very large security detail, and I thought we were going the wrong direction. I said to Mustafa, I think we're going the wrong direction. And he said, Your Excellency, I'm sure this is right. And I said, Mustafa, you're the boss. And he turned to me and he said, yes, Your Excellency, but Mrs. Kaplan is the big boss.
I think you should know that it is very important to know that in Morocco, and there was we had a chance, by the way, to go to Portugal or go somewhere else, and I wanted to go very much to a Muslim and an Arab country and to figure out what life was like for people there. But and also living in a kingdom was very interesting. But you should know that the American ambassador has a full security detail. His Majesty the King, in Morocco is a kingdom, decided that the American ambassador needed security, and so there were 3 cars: the lead car, the follow car, the limousine that we went in. You could never roll down the windows or listen to music, and you didn't open your own car doors. It was a very structured kind of life, and he could not walk out the front door without security. And it wasn't, by the way, a dangerous place. Even after the Arab Spring, I never felt at any risk. When I wasn't with him, would walk anywhere by myself, and I always felt perfectly safe.
But let me talk a little bit about Morocco.
Yeah, please.
And
Yeah.
what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Because it's very relevant to this. On Wednesday of this week, Tom Friedman wrote an editorial, and he was talking primarily about the immigration challenge. But he said ultimately the world can be divided in many ways, but for our purposes now, the world is divided into 2 parts. the world of order and the world of disorder. And the people who are refugees are trying to escape the world of disorder and find a way to the world of order. And then he said, nowhere is this worse than in the Middle East and in North Africa. We were privileged to serve in one of the few places in North Africa and the Middle East that is in the world of order. It is by many people regarded to be a haven of stability. They have a king who they respect. They have a family, a royal family, that does not do inappropriate things. That makes a big difference. It's a country with huge problems, but one that has made enormous strides.
And, right, so you should,
So, you want to know what I did?
what you did in this stable country. It was, by the way, you really have to understand, I mean, we all grow up reading fairy tales, and we imagine what it's like to live in a kingdom. And a real kingdom means that the king is in charge. And in Morocco, it's very clear that the king is in charge, and that provides stability. And I thought when I got there, I would meet, like artists and intellectuals and troublemakers and people who would say, we've got to get rid of the king and have a democracy. But I was very surprised to find out that even the people who you would think would be critical of living under those kinds of circumstances valued the king and valued stability and were very concerned if anything would happen to the royal family. So it was different than I expected it to be.
We live in the greatest country in the world, and we grew up believing as kids that our form of government is the only real form of government that has merit. And when you go to another country and you see that the people are happy in the roles that they play in their society and they feel safe. Feeling safe is a very big thing in the world today. And they feel safe. Then you realize that we must be careful in saying we have the only solutions for the form of government. It was very important to me every morning when I would get to the office to meet with the CIA station chief. We had a very large CIA team because we were dealing with a country that could have difficulties in terrorism, but doesn't, because they have developed a counterterrorism program where they have used our expertise in order to do it. But I learned every morning what was happening in the rest of the world, including Morocco. Almost every day I was in the foreign minister's office or the interior minister's office. These are the two principal people in the country. Or I was in the justice minister's office if there were issues we were complaining about in terms of how Americans were being treated. Or I was in the economic minister's office trying to advance the cause of American countries. But a lot of what you do is ceremonial. We had at our house many, many dinners with representatives of foreign countries, Congress people. We were loaded with Congress people. They loved to come to Morocco. Sylvia was in charge. Sylvia was the only spouse of an ambassador who did any cooking, so that made her be recognized as Sylvia the cook.
And people who didn't enjoy the food didn't get invited back. I want you to know, though, our very favorite house guests were the Peace Corps volunteers. We had a very active, involved Peace Corps contingent in Morocco. In fact, I think Morocco was the country that the original Peace Corps started, and they were about 100. The class was about 100 people. Interesting, by the way, they weren't all young people like you. Some of them were older people. When Hillary Clinton came to visit the first time that she came, I still remember we had an 85-year-old Peace Corps volunteer there, a woman from Florida, and she called out and met her and was very impressed. So the Peace Corps would come and they would go through a couple of months of training and learning the language, and we would always visit with them and speak to them before they went out to their posts where it was very cold and very hot and very uncomfortable and very remote from civilization. And I would tell them that they should pay attention. As a good anthropologist, I would say you pay attention to what's universal about human nature, what you notice, and what's particular. And then when they came back, before they left the country, we would meet with them because we love to have a chance to debrief them, because these were people who spoke the local language and lived with the people. I mean, they were the real ambassadors, and they could tell us what really happened. Did people really love their king? What did they watch on television? What did they do for fun? All of those kinds of things. So it just was amazing. I think that the Peace Corps almost universally said that they probably were personally changed more than they were able to change the people. You know, they worked on things like healthcare. They worked on various community organizing projects. In the end, I think the Peace Corps in Morocco focused only on youth organizing, because the feeling was that there were all these young people who were potentially going to get in some pretty serious trouble. And so it was important to meet with them. And we like to travel around the country. We would meet with the Peace Corps people, who would often be our interpreters and introduce us to the young people they were working with. We had one rap group, I think that I still have the DVD that they did, and or the CD, and it was just exciting to meet these young people. They all wanted to learn English.
And they drank a lot of beer. Oh my God.
Young people?
No, the Peace Corps.
Oh, that's right. When they came to our house, they drank a lot of beer and they ate a lot of food. So they were our favorite guests. They actually were. But it was fun to meet. It was fun to visit with them and to see what they were doing and to hear their interpretation of what was going on in those small town communities. Like during Ramadan, as you know, it's a whole month of fasting, and they would fast with the families. I was very impressed with them, and it's always interesting to see what they do later with what they learn.
One of the things that's interesting, Matthew, is that the people who are your closest friends in the diplomatic corps are not necessarily the ones you would expect. In two respects, they're always the people you expect. That is to say, Great Britain and Canada are the people that you're most allied with on many, many issues. But thereafter, it's quite different. The ambassador from Croatia was a very close friend. The ambassador from we had 450 people. The ambassador from Dominican Republic had 2, but we were very close friends. And I would tell you, Anastasia, that Boris was the ambassador from Russia.
We love Boris.
Boris looked like Boris, by the way. And Boris always sends spies to our house to take pictures, and he was our favorite house guest.
Because Sam represented a local liquor distributor here who made vodka, so Sam was very proud, and he brought him a bottle of Minnesota vodka, and Boris says, he says, I give you vodka, you don't give me vodka. And so we learned, and we didn't do that anymore, but they would have parties with jazz, Russian love jazz, American jazz, and they would be playing when the Saints come marching in, and they would give you caviar, and so those were some of the very best parties. But our other closest friends were probably the ambassadors from the Arab countries. They understood hospitality. They were Jordan and Algeria and other ambassadors from Egypt, and it was really interesting, and it was a great privilege for us to be able to understand their views on the world. And when Americans would come, we would always try to plan dinner parties where our American visitors, some of them very distinguished, could sit next to these people and understand how the world looks from their point of view. Fortunately, there wasn't a diplomatic contingency from Iran because they threw them out, right? It was too bad. It was the Sunni Shia thing, which is too bad.
We haven't told you something that only a few of you probably know, and it's a very relevant thing. That is, Morocco is the oldest friend of the United States. Once we had signed the Declaration of Independence, Morocco was the first country of the world to acknowledge the independence of the United States. And shortly after that, we entered into a friendship treaty, and that treaty is the oldest treaty still in force in America. And when you walk through the streets of Morocco, they come up to you and they say, Mr. Ambassador, did you know that America was the first country? Yes, I did know that. And I thank you very much for telling me. It's always good to hear that. And they take that very, very seriously.
Excellent. And Jeremy, I think we have a couple slides about Morocco. I believe we're going to roll through those kind of as background. Richie, we have some slides. And let's turn to the audience. We maybe have a question or two from some of you. We'll just kind of leave that. Anyone out there?
99% Muslim, that is true. Everything so far up there is factual.
It's from the CIA World Factbook, so it's all right.
This is very good.
You never know.
Well, you should know those things, right?
Maybe it's from the-
It's interesting that Arabic is, because you should understand that it's complicated because they became, they were a French protectorate until 56, and then they became independent after 56. So it's a complicated of languages, and for a long time, French was kind of the language of the elites, and in many ways it still is. So in school, they used to teach in French. They changed it to Arabic sometime in the 80s, but they didn't have teachers trained in science and math and other things to teach in Arabic. So there's the education system has kind of been a disaster, and that's a big problem for the country.
Right.
Just
I don't, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, I just wanted to start by thanking both the Honorable Kaplans. Thank you for gracing us with the opportunity to learn from your experience and your intelligence. My question concerns international deals and talks. We see a lot of news about talks and deals, and my question is specifically, how much of these talks are in formal settings, and how much of these talks actually happen behind the scenes in informal talks, informal meetings?
You're talking like the Iran deal right now as an example.
Yes, exactly.
So, I've only met President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority once. And he came to Morocco and he spoke in a very, very aggressive manner, very much against Israel, very much against America. And what you do as a diplomat is you sit stone-faced and you hear it. And that was followed by representatives of Morocco and another country, equally negative about America and equally negative about Israel. And then when I went back to my office, the foreign minister called me and said, can you come back to the office at 3 o'clock? I went back to the office at 3 o'clock, and instead of a group of 700 people, there were 9. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, the Foreign Minister of Jordan, the Foreign Minister of the Palestinian Authority, and he said, what can we do to try to make it work? Were we successful? We were not. But that's the way I think things really are done.
You should talk also a bit about the Western Sahara, because that's so important.
In 1974, Spain pulled out of an area that was called the Spanish Protectorate, which is contiguous to Morocco. Morocco immediately claimed the territory, and it has been in dispute ever since. And for a long time there was a hot war involving Algeria, supported people who lived in the desert. And today there is a international force there to keep peace. The Moroccans so want that territory to be under the autonomy of the territory itself, but the sovereignty of Morocco, that it is their principal issue. When Secretary Clinton said, I regard your solution to be serious and credible, they nodded and they expressed their appreciation. When she came back the next year and said, I regard your solution to be serious, realistic, and credible, They were dancing in the streets.
And so there was a United Nations, what was his name, Ross? The guy who was the United Nations guy who was supposed to fix things for the Western Sahara. So it would be meetings with the United States and with Canada, with Britain and France. Who else was there? It was like just a small group of people. And
But by the way, in answer to who was there, we operate around the world. We operate around the world very much the way the Iran talks occurred. It's always 5+1, the 5 permanent to the United Nations plus Germany, and those are the people who were there.
And it was always, you know, and I, of course, wasn't participating, but when it happened to be meeting at our living room, I was, you know, paying attention to what was going on, and it just sort of seemed...
There were no secrets in our house.
Well, I didn't tell other people, but I just, you know, I would...
I never believed you.
Yeah, the guy who was in charge, he drank a lot, so you had to keep bringing him refills. And it was better for me to do that than from the butler to do that, because who knows, you know, so there's this strange kind of thing when you're having meetings and you don't know who you can trust or who shouldn't be in the room. And we thought, I was very unhappy that in the United States, the embassy, there were, well, in the first place, I couldn't go up to his office without being escorted. But more importantly, half of our people who worked for us were locals, were Moroccans, and they could not be present at a lot. It was like they were working very closely with people, but then they had to leave the room. And so I didn't think that was,
We
you
have
know, that was good.
some of you are thinking about the Foreign Service. I should tell you that we have a tradition in America of not trusting the leaders of host countries. Not trusting is a part of the American Foreign Service approach, so that if you want to come to America and you want to seek a visa at our consulate, and you say you're going to return to your home country, we are to assume you're lying. You must prove that you're telling the truth when you say you will return, because we are not going to allow people in the country. And this is so interesting because these are such good people. It would be helpful to have them in the country, and we fight over the millions of other immigrants without discussing this.
Interesting. I think there's a couple other
Yeah.
hands in the air here.
Yeah, we have questions here, but I'd also like to encourage this, again, it's a discussion-based event. We have soda over here, pizza. Feel free to stand up, get another beer, get some more soda, pizza.
Does he have permission?
Yeah.
Oh, he's
You don't want to waste all that pizza.
Thank you. I actually had the opportunity to be with you this afternoon, so I just want to say thank you again. My name is Evan Torres. My question is, you were in Morocco during the 2012 election. Can you speak on if it was important for the Moroccans or for the other Arab countries? How is it? How did they view the elections of 2012, and who?
In Morocco, if you would ask the people of Morocco, and if you would ask the diplomatic corps, where Israel was not represented, but there were people from Israel, excepting for Israel and Pakistan, it was 97% for President Obama. Now this is very interesting, and the reason for it is in part that they believe that the worst mistake America has made in that part of the world is going into Iraq. And the second worst mistake was going into Afghanistan. And the third worst mistake was in unduly supporting Israel, which I think is unfair. And the fourth worst mistake was continuing to operate Guantanamo. And they believed that President Obama was making an effort to get out of Iraq, to get out of Afghanistan, to even the playing field in the Middle East, and to close Guantanamo.
And I think I've said this before today to some of you that I've spoken to informally, but we were so impressed with how much Moroccan students and other people we met in Morocco knew about what was going on in this country. They knew all the details about the election. I mean, as soon as we got there, people were asking us about Paul Wellstone. They were asking us about other things that were going on. And during the debates, before the primaries, when the Republicans were debating, of course it was Obama, so there weren't Democratic debates. They were quite bewildered. They really could not understand the quality of the discussions and some of the candidates. And so particularly when we talk to young people at various colleges, I tried to explain that democracy works and people get to say what they want. And I always quoted Paul Wellstone and when he talked about the joy of politics. But they really didn't kind of see it that way. They were not so impressed. And so I'm thinking now with this current, the 2016 campaign that's coming along, I just wonder, I haven't checked with any of my friends back in Morocco, and I'm wondering what they think about Donald Trump and some of the other discussions.
You know, there are challenges when you're in another country and you don't speak all the languages and you speak through an interpreter. And I remember the time that I was speaking in Morocco about Paul Wellstone, talking about his principal view, which is we all do better when we all do better. The interpreter couldn't get it.
Wow.
It was just beyond anything that he could comprehend. I will tell you this, that there is not a single person I met in 3.5 years who didn't believe that we have a stupid electoral system in this country because of the length of the election period. Not one person thought it was a good idea.
Any of you think it should be longer? No. I think we have a couple other questions over here.
How would your job be different if you were a career ambassador versus political?
Not at all.
It would not be different at all, but my mindset would be different because when you're a career ambassador, unless you're 65 years old, and this is your last tour of duty, you are thinking about what your next approach is going to be. It's the biggest challenge of the diplomatic corps. It takes you a year to get settled, a year to figure out what you want to do, and a year to make the plans to go on to the next step. When I left Morocco, after 3.5 years, I had seniorities among the Americans. All of them had to be rotated out.
He's right, and he is right. So that does make a big difference. I mean, clearly, I don't know if any of you have followed any of the criticism in the press and other places, but there are a lot of careerists who think that this political ambassadorship thing is not fair. They think that some of the best places like, you know, London and Paris and Rome and those places go to political ambassadors rather than careerists, and they think that after working hard and spending all of their time in the Foreign Service, they get to do that. But I think the other thing, not just the time spent worrying about their next posting, is if you start as a junior officer, and if you screw up or you take too many risks, you're not going to survive. You are not. So people tend to get to be careful. They don't speak out clearly about what's going on. And I think many of the political ambassadors have been able to do things that careerists could not do. We have a friend who was in Finland. His name is Bruce Orrick, and he was like the longest serving political ambassador. I think he was there for like 6 years. But he revolutionized what was going on. He was the greenest ambassador we have ever had. He wanted to go to Finland, particularly for that reason, because he was so committed to environmental issues, but he managed to get money from the State Department and other places. He, if any of you ever have a chance to go to Helsinki, go visit the embassy or visit the residence and see what he's been able to do there. It's amazing. And he had the connections in Washington, and he could just do things that a careerist couldn't have done.
2 more comments about political ambassadors. The government of Morocco wanted a political ambassador. The government of Saudi Arabia wants a political ambassador because they believe a political ambassador is more likely to have a line to the White House. This is very important to them. What is the advantage of being a political ambassador? In addition to the fact they're not planning your next move, more often than not, political ambassadors have run something. They run a business, they run a school, they run a law firm, they run a whole variety of things. That's a skill and experience that most of the careers don't have. What is the shortcoming of being a political ambassador? You don't know the people at the State Department. Buried in the hierarchy, the guy who's sixth in line for something, but he knows where you can do this or do that.
Or they can sabotage what you're trying to do, so.
They would never do that to me.
Of course not.
Fantastic. What advice do you have for particularly the students here in the audience who may be interested in the Foreign Service, or they may be interested in doing international development work or humanitarian work or perhaps military overseas? Just what should they be doing while in school to best prepare themselves for a career or exploration?
It's so simple. Learn foreign languages. Learn a lot of them. Learn more than one. Once you learn one, the second one comes more readily. It is an indispensable piece of going abroad. And the other thing that I would suggest is that people travel. It doesn't make any difference where you travel. And travel where the culture is different from yours. And test yourself and see if that's a comfortable experience being in such a setting. Because that's what you're going to do later on.
And join the CIA because they got all the money.
There you go.
And it is interesting, you know, there were, and it's not just the CIA, by the way, what you find out is that the military is the military, but then there are all kinds of people who are attached to the military who aren't actually part of the military. So we would go through training and we would meet all kinds of people who I still don't know what they were doing. So we try to figure all of that out, and there are options. So you want options where you get the most freedom and flexibility and excitement, and that's what's happening, because it is an exciting world out there, and it's a wonderful opportunity to be part of it.
Matthew, if I can say something that is completely non sequitur and has nothing to do with anything you talked about, and that is you should understand that most political ambassadors really are careful to eliminate their political affiliation in all that they do. And most of what you do has nothing to do with being a Democrat or a Republican. We became very close to my predecessor, who was a Republican businessman from California, and he was extraordinarily helpful in making it work for us. So the system is a lot better than I think people give it credit for.
So if I can infer, that it sounds like there's consistency in terms of how the United States is represented overseas, whether you're coming from a Republican or Democratic background. It almost doesn't matter. It's
Absolutely, and when Obama came took office, another friend from Ben Whitney, who had been from Minnesota also and was the ambassador in Norway, said
Family comes from this.
his wife is a Ben.
Yeah.
right, exactly, and so he said his children were in school. Could he stay till June? And they let him stay for June. There was no reason. He was representing the Obama administration. It was no different than representing the Bush administration.
Excellent. Other questions from the audience? Anyone? Go ahead. Do we have Richie? Is there a question up there too? Okay. Go ahead, the microphone right here. Perfect.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak with you and you speak. I was wondering, Mrs. Kaplan, you mentioned this earlier at dinner when getting talking about it. Can you speak a little bit about your experience as a politically involved woman in Morocco?
Yeah, everyone asks that. They ask, did you have to cover your head? Did you have to worry about what you wore? Did you worry, there are, particularly in the smaller, more rural instance, would not be sitting outside in a cafe. That would not be considered appropriate. On the other hand, you go to Casablanca, you go to banks, and you go to businesses, and you could be in any European capital, there wouldn't be any difference. So it's and right now there are actually more women in colleges than men. Women have always done all the work in Morocco, and we talk to many business leaders, and they say, I would much prefer to hire women than men because women are better workers. You know, they're the moms and the dads too. They all spoil those little boys, and so some of them don't understand how things should work. Me personally, together we spoke to lots of women's groups because Hillary Clinton was very committed to women's issues around the world, and wherever she went, she had a special Melaine Vivier, who was her deputy in charge of women's equality issues, and there were conferences, and there were efforts to empower women. And what I found most interesting, particularly talking to groups of young women, and you know, there would be a group like you're sitting here, we would be talking to them, and the women who were more traditional in the sense that they covered their heads and wore more traditional clothes were just as outspoken and just as active as the women who were wearing short skirts and Western clothes. I think, you know, during the Arab Spring, it was very interesting the role that social media played for women, because women could get very involved in, say, organizing a demonstration, and you would see without having to actually even be there. So things are changing for women. There are many women who've been elected to the legislature, many outspoken women, many women who are business leaders, and I think the business leaders are very important. And when congressional delegations came from the United States, they would meet with academics, and they would meet with educators, and they would meet with government leaders, and I would always tell them to meet with the business leaders, because I thought that's where the vanguard was, and I thought that's where the most opportunities for women were.
Hi, I want to say thank you again for coming, and my question is, I know as an ambassador, most people consider them a figurehead and think that they don't have much influence in public policy of the countries that they're stationed in, but what would you say was your most difficult challenge as an ambassador in public policy or just in general in your time there?
Well, part of it was what I talked about when I talked about the Western Sahara, but also to recognize that it is a different culture, and it's not so easy. So I had been there for 5.5 months, and I thought they loved me. They did. And then suddenly they expelled 50 American Christians. They took them to the airport and
They
put
expelled them.
them
Why they expelled them?
for proselytizing. And it was a much more complicated thing. These were not people who were selling things on the corners, magazines. What they were doing is that they had orphanages that they ran, and every day they taught the kids the Quran, and then they lived in settings that were family-like settings, and they were really teaching them a Christian theology.
They were evangelical Christians, and they took these children into their homes, and nobody, but for years and years, nobody paid any attention, and nobody cared, and then all of a sudden they did.
So I rushed over to the foreign minister's house, and I told him, you can't do this, and he said, we've done it. And they already had taken them to the airport, and they said, you wouldn't want them to be in your prisons. When they did it again, and they told me about it in advance, I told them, you can't do this, and you must reverse it. If you don't reverse it, this will seriously reflect on our relationship. And they reversed it. So if you ask me what was the biggest challenge, probably that was it. At least it was the biggest crime.
It was very interesting because we had friends at the State Department who actually volunteered in these orphanages. And it was, you know, it was heartbreaking really to see these children taken away from these families and all these things going on. On the other hand, I mean, Morocco is not the only country that, you know, doesn't allow proselytizing. Israel doesn't allow proselytizing. Many countries didn't. So you have to pay attention to those things. And you know, this was a great learning experience for us. And here's an interesting little side story. As Jews there in this 99% Muslim country, there was a community of about 4,000 Jews in Morocco, and we became good friends with many of these people. And the leader of the group of the Jews, he was actually appointed by His Majesty to be the ambassador to the Jewish community, Serge Verdugo. When Sam made a statement about what happened and how outrageous this was, and it was published in the paper, he called us and met us in a hotel in Casablanca, and he sat down with us, and he essentially said, this is a good king. The Jews are very comfortable here in Morocco. You know, he was essentially saying to Sam, you know, you're the new kid on the block. You don't know how things have been going on for several centuries. Please don't make trouble. So this was an interesting message and different experience. I mean, because as soon as this happened, they called the chief rabbi for the country back from his vacation in Paris, and he came back and said how wonderful the king was. The Christian leader of the Catholic community said how wonderful the king was. It was very clear that there are rules, and you follow those rules.
One last thing, because I have to tell you, we're going to make this the last thing. I don't think it was an Arab Spring. I think it was an Arab storm. When you look at Libya and Tunisia and Egypt and Syria and all of those countries, in many respects they're worse off than they were before. In every country except Morocco. In Morocco there was an Arab Spring, there were reforms, not as great as they might have been, but still substantial. It is a very stable country. It is a country that is a very strong ally of America. So we were privileged to serve there.
Well, on that note, it's just been a wonderful evening of insider stories and advice, and we really appreciate your service, like as I mentioned, to the country, to the world, and coming up here today at a Collegeville in St. Ben, St. John's, and educating all of us about the world and Morocco and our relationship.
Are they filling out evaluation down there?
Yes, Your Excellency. They are indeed filling out the evaluations on your performance tonight. And I have to say it was quite exceptional. So let's give you a round of applause.
So,
as a token of our gratitude, we would like to present you our, one second here.
behind the curtain.
It's that big.
Yeah, it's that big.
After all, the title of this event is Politics in a Pint. So it would be odd if you weren't to be given your own pint glass.
What do you have here? All right. There you go.
Thank you very much. You asked how I got started in politics. I got started in politics when, as a young man, I went door to door distributing circulars for Gene McCarthy's running for the House of Representatives. That
There you
shows
go.
you how long
Thank
ago
you,
it was.
right.
A couple years ago. Thank you very much.